All right. So day 6, we are going to cover, we're out of the heart, like we've been to, it's like heart disease and heart disease and heart disease. Now we're going to go ahead and move out of that a little bit and go into dealing with like osteoporosis. So this is going to be day 6 here. We are going to get into a little bit of arthritis, a little bit of osteoporosis, very common populations that we're going to run into all the time. They are slightly different. A lot of people think that they are. I mean, the training modifications that you make are fairly similar, but they are very different conditions. Like osteoporosis is a bone disorder, arthritis is a joint disorder. So there is a little bit of difference there, which means they're going to respond differently to exercise, and the limitations are going to be slightly different. But as we're looking at it, osteoporosis, giving that just a quick definition, is a condition in which there's a decrease in bone mass and density, as well as an increase in the space between our bones. So if we look at like osteoporosis versus regular bone, what we'll see is there's literally just like, this is a much more like, this is a majorly zoomed in picture here that just downloaded to my computer instead of opening. But you can see there's just a lot more space in between. Like this is like bone tissue that just isn't very dense, right? So that means that this right here is much more likely to fracture. So we'll see like things like this. And then you can, did that happen again? What's going on with the internet right now? 2 in a row that I just happened to find. That is insane. All right, so you can see here, like, this is cool. There's a lot of like different layers and like very dense bone, whereas here, there's just a lot of empty space. So what we'll look for is like when someone actually experiences like a pretty substantial amount of like weight loss out of nowhere, even though their body fat percentage is relatively similar, that's one of our warning signs of osteoporosis. They'll call that osteopenia. And that's where it's like the early sort of signs of it. And there you can even see like in the x-ray, right? That's just much less dense. So it results in an increased porosity of the bones. I love that word, but it's an increased holiness, right? Making them much more fragile. So osteopenia, which is a term you'll sometimes hear as well, is sort of the precursor to osteoporosis. It's where the bones have stopped like calcifying effectively. And so like, because of like that decrease in calcification, eventually it leads to like low bone mass because, you're just not repairing as fast as you are sort of building. So, as we are sort of looking at this, right, what's happening here is when we're younger, we've got two different types of like bone cells, right? We have our osteoblasts and we have our osteoclasts. Your osteoblasts, which are the bone makers, right? They're much more active when we're older. Whereas like our osteoclasts, which are bone breaker downers, they're much more active. I'm sorry, I think I said older a second ago. When we're younger, our osteoblasts are more active. And as we get older, our osteoclasts become more active. So our bone makers are more active when we are young, and our bone breakers are more active when we are old. And that's, what results in this decrease in density, right? Osteoclasts here. You can kind of see like the way these two cells, they're supposed to work together, right? Like they're supposed to like, function properly in order to increase density. So, here you can see, imagine like this is kind of going from left to right. Okay, so it's starting over here, and like the osteoclasts come along and they kind of shaved this whole section off, and then they're going to keep working their way this way. The osteoblasts, these are the bone builder uppers, right? They're coming along afterwards, laying stuff down in order to increase that density. So that's what's supposed to happen. But as we get older, like the class becomes so active that it sort of just like breaks things down faster. So really now we start looking at exercise in a different viewpoint almost, right? It's we start paying attention to the fact that it's like, oh, okay, well, by exercising, I actually want to create bone stress. And if I can create that bone stress, that's going to signal to my body, hey, we need this bone tissue. We need to keep this around. We need to remodel like regularly because we are an active person, and that's what's going to keep our bone tissue from decreasing. If you're going to trigger the repair process in the same way that like it comes to like building muscle, right? We exercise, that creates cellular damage in our muscles, right? Because like when we exercise, we produce things like lactic acid, also just moving the proteins back and forth. Like actin and myosin, they kind of get damaged when they're grabbing each other all the time and like releasing and grabbing and releasing. Imagine the way I always describe it is like if you imagined like, like a string of rope, right? And you like let it out and then you pulled it back in and then you let it out and you pulled it back in, your hands would be kind of raw by the end of the day,
Yeah.
That's kind of what happens. That's one of the reasons we experience muscle growth. And then another big reason why we experience muscle growth is because we make lactic acid, which is actually so acidic that it eats away at some of our muscle tissue and damages it. So, it's funny, like you don't build muscle in the gym, you break muscle in the gym, like you build muscle in the kitchen and in your bed, Um, but if we're looking at osteoporosis, the same thing is true, right? You don't build bone mass in the gym. You actually damage your bone mass while you're in the gym. But then like you are going to like, rest and recover and eat. And that's going to bring all kinds of things back into the body that are going to make it easier for us to repair. So when you are more physically active, your osteoblast activity actually increases. That's your bone building because, again, in the same way that your body goes, man, we need more muscle mass to be able to deal with all the cellular damage that we're creating. Your bone tissue goes, man, we need some more bone mass to deal with all this damage that we're creating, right? And that's how we're going to keep things around. And you'll usually see like seniors, like after a certain age, they start to experience like 1% to 2% bone loss per year, which is a pretty substantial amount. That's why one of the we're going to see that statistic and sort of written another way, actually, in our next course. When we get to the senior the senior class, which is coming up on Tuesday. We're going to talk about how, we see like, 10% bone mass loss over, each decade, right? That's a lot, imagine just like losing 10% of your skeletal system, we've got two types of osteoporosis here, not very similar to the way like diabetes works. Diabetes was like building up like a resistance to things, and so that's why that is actually why like we became insulin resistant, right? Osteoporosis is a little bit different than that. Type 1 is actually just referring to decrease in like hormones, particularly estrogen, whereas like type 2 is just like, hey, you're getting old and like your bone density is decreasing because like things are just changing. So there is sort of two types here. So type 1 is most prevalent in like post-menopausal women who have decreased their estrogen levels, right? One of the things that kind of comes along with menopause is this decrease in the production of estrogen, and in the same way that testosterone is very important for men to build like bone density, muscle mass, things like that. Estrogen is very important for women. And this is why you'll actually also sometimes see osteoporosis in like teenagers, sometimes like teenage girls who basically like, if they start like having like disordered eating where they're not eating enough calories and it disrupts their hormones and they don't have enough estrogen, they'll actually lose bone density. And that's one of the very intense negative effects of disordered eating. Well, with osteoporosis in type 1 for adults or seniors, That's the same sort of thing. Type 2 is osteoporosis in people who are about 70 years and older, which is sort of just like the comment. It's like, look, you're getting up there, like, and it's like your body is just trying to like be as efficient as possible at this age because your metabolism isn't what it used to be. So the amount of density is simply decreasing, but again, that can be fought off. That can absolutely be fought off through like exercise and stuff. I was actually just watching a video the other day that was pretty fascinating. It was talking about like substantial age changes. It was a SciShow video. I'm not gonna be able to find it. It was a really cool video though, and it was talking about like the 3 ages where like your blood and your biology just like have a massive shift. One of them is like early on near puberty. One of them is like right around like 30, 35. And one of them is right around age like 70, 72. And so like we just see like a major sort of tone shift in our biology there, and that's sort of, made me think. That's what I think of when I think of type 2 osteoporosis. So this can affect, this is an overall bone density thing, right? Like this is happening in your entire skeletal system. However, two of the biggest areas that are affected by osteoporosis are going to be the neck of the femur and your lumbar vertebrae. So the neck of the femur is that head that inserts into your pelvis, right? It's that ball and socket joint, right? This is an area, this neck right here is an area that often experiences a lot of like fractures as we get older. And that hip fracture, a broken hip, right, is extremely painful and something that we are trying to avoid absolutely at all costs. Now, I know that sounds like, yeah, man, of course we're trying to avoid broken bones, like I know it sounds really obvious to say, but in particular, one of the statistics we are going to see next course when we get into it on Tuesday, we are going to see that like hip fractures often result in morbidity or mortality within like 1 calendar year in 25% of people who experience it. So like a quarter of the population who like breaks their hip often expires within 1 calendar year. Now, that's not because like the hip is magical. It's just, it is required in order to literally do all of our daily activities. And so what happens when somebody experiences this type of fracture is they just stop moving. And that lack of movement, that increased, sedentary lifestyle is sort of what kills us, and then the other one is our lumbar vertebrae. We do know that like, part of the reason why, like my mom hates this, but like she's not as tall as she used to be, like as she's gotten older, like she's lost a little bit of height there. So if we look at like osteoporosis of the lumbar, actually, we'll just go over the vertebrae. What you'll see is sort of a decrease in that density there. And it is very common to see all kinds of like different fractures. And when those fractures happen, it alters our posture. And that's why we sort of see that kind of common, oh, there's Thomas. We see that kind of common sort of hunching that starts to happen as we get older, right? What's up, Thomas? And you can see like the stomach kind of pooches out in the opposite direction in order to like kind of counterbalance. But like that right there is what happens when we lose too much bone density, right? We start to see this kind of curling action there associated with decreased density in the discs. So definitely another reason for us to stay physically active and keep moving around, the more we can move, the less we're going to have to deal with this stuff. So those are our two types of osteoporosis. That's sort of what we're seeing there. So let's make some considerations here, because there's going to be this first one here is going to be a little bit surprising. So things we need to be aware of in order to, make adjustments for our clients. One of them is that the ventilatory threshold of our clients can actually be lower with osteoporosis. Now, just got done saying this is a bone disorder. What the heck does this have to do with our lungs? Right? Well, your ventilatory threshold is, think of it as like the threshold by which you get out of breath, right? It's like it is the as your heart rate like climbs, right? If we were to like picture like sort of a pie, like a line chart, right? And it's like, as my heart rate goes to here, my level of out of breathness, sort of climbs with it, right? So you would just kind of track both of those lines. Well, that out of breath line is going to happen a lot faster with clients with osteoporosis for two reasons. Number one, yeah, their posture is going to be affected, and so it's going to be harder for them to stay nice and upright and be able to open up the rib cage and breathe properly and things like that. So that could be one of the reasons, right? But the sort of more common reason is, you got to remember, like, what do your bones do, guys? In addition to like providing like levers, which is mostly what we've been talking about this mod, what do your bones do?
It just allows I don't know, movement to the body.
Very true. They are levers. Yeah, absolutely. We've been spending most of this mod talking about how your bones are responsible for like our posture and stuff. But let's go a little bit more, like, think like physiology, like think like how would your bones be related to cardio? Thomas, I know you know this from your first mod. But how are our bones related to our cardiorespiratory system? So this is something, Eddie, we haven't talked too much about because it's just not as relevant to kinesiology, but your bones make your red blood cells. Like, it is where you create your red blood cells, right? So if you look at the life cycle, if you look at the life cycle of a red blood cell, it starts out kind of looking like this. It starts out as a really, actually quite big cell. They call it a hematopoietic cell, right? And it's kind of like it's like a stem cell. It's not necessarily like a cell that actually has any specific shape or any specific function right now. It's just like, it can kind of become anything, the world is this cell's oyster, And so that is actually what starts in, if it's the red bone marrow, that's where the red blood cells are being created. If it's the white bone marrow, that's where your yellow bone marrow, that's where your white blood cells are being created. But we're talking mostly about our red blood cells here. So what happens is, like, they start to sort of myelinate, and then eventually they actually start spitting out their organelles. So like, as it gets older, eventually, what's kind of cool about red blood cells is, once that reaches maturity, it goes and it spits out all of its organs. Which is actually what causes, that's why when we look at a red blood cell, it actually looks like this. You look at an erythrocyte, it kind of looks like a little filled in donut, or like a little bloody like breath mint, Yeah. And that's because it used to be like a big bubble, but then it lost all the stuff that was inside of it, so it collapsed in on itself. And that shape is what allows it to squeeze through tiny openings in like blood vessels and things like that, right? Like here, that's a pretty big tube. There's a lot of blood flow here. But if you get into like a capillary, eventually it's going to have to squeeze. See if I can actually find a picture of this. This is going to be really challenging. Okay, yeah, no, there we go. So it would finally get like narrow enough. That's exactly what I want. And it actually allows it to kind of squeeze. So it needs to have that shape. That's what allows it to kind of squeeze through narrow passages in our like very, very small blood vessels. What's interesting about your blood vessels is sometimes they're smaller than the red blood cells. And the red blood cells are some of the smallest cells in your body. They are itty bitty in comparison to some of your other cells. So Now we start to understand, okay, well, if I don't have as many red blood cells, I can't carry oxygen as efficiently. If I can't carry oxygen quite as efficiently, I'm going to have a lower cardiorespiratory, like a ventilatory threshold. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So that's actually part of this as well. And so that's one of the things that we pay attention to. If I've got a client with osteoporosis, I'm probably going to do some form of cardio so I can get this person like up and moving. And, because if you lose your, you lose your cardio, you move less, you get more osteoporosis. It's all sort of connected there. Your cardio is your endurance, Um, and then a big one is that our gait and our balance may be negatively affected. Senior clients who are dealing with osteoporosis, because there's sort of two components to this as well, really. One of the reasons why like their gait and their balance is negatively affected is because, like, again, they've had years of this nervous system that knows how to control like a limb that weighs X number of pounds, but now that's been adjusted, right? And then part of it is like, well, with decreased density, everything aches a little bit more, everything hurts a little bit more, it's a little bit more challenging to move. Your proprioception's already been turned off, or thrown off, right? And now like you're trying to like take like a big step and it feels like you're going to lose your balance, right? So you start to see like older clients do that like kind of old person shuffle, where they take like little tiny steps instead of taking like a big step, which is only going to make the problem worse over time as they lose the ability to take like a large step. So their balance, their gait, both of those things are going to be very negatively affected. Chronic vertebral fractures may result in chronic low back pain. Just again, low bone density. There's a lot of pressure coming down onto your low back. So that low bone density eventually leads to, constant back pain. And increased risk of falls. Obviously, that's associated with the balance. And so, we got to be cautious about things like this. We don't want to do like foam rolling, like SMR is not necessarily a good option for a client with osteoporosis.
Like you said, that someone was from rolling it somewhere around their rib cage and then they broke a rib or something like that.
Sure did. Yep. They fractured one of their ribs in a class that I taught, but not at the time I was teaching it. Yeah.
Right.
Because everybody, that's how that place worked, is we all taught, on like a rotation.
I see.
Yeah, just the morning 11 a.m. stretch class, like,
And it was only stretch class. Damn.
yeah, it was the most gentle type of class,
Jeez.
So risk factors for osteoporosis, we're seeing it affect, like I said, about 25 million people each year. Your risk factors that are going to, what is going to put you at increased risk of developing osteoporosis? Being older, right? Obviously, we know this kind of comes with age. Your gender, like females tend to be a higher risk than males are. Again, due to that estrogen. If you have a family history of osteoporosis, this is like one of the reasons why they ask that in your medical history. Because if your parents dealt with it, there's probably genetically an increased likelihood that you are going to deal with it. Ethnicity is a big one. This is like, so I had a coworker who was even paler than I am.
Oh, man.
If that is possible. And she was like, like just very clearly like full Swedish, you know what I mean? Like bright blonde hair, super bright blue eyes, no color. And like she had to go get like vitamin D injections every couple months because like she just doesn't absorb sunlight. Like sunlight hits her, boom, it bounces right off, like
Crazy.
she is a mirror.
I think that's possible.
Right. Yeah. She was one of the instructors here at Sochi and stuff. But like that's the thing. Like it's very common, in like where I'm from the Northwest. There's a lot of cloud cover. You don't absorb vitamin D. Vitamin D is, we call it the sunshine vitamin, and that is designed to like take in vitamin D through our skin, and then we use vitamin D to calcify calcium. Right. We use vitamin D to sort of use our calcium and stuff. So if you're not absorbing enough vitamin D, you are much more likely to develop osteoporosis. And so like, the pale Thompsons, it does run in my family for sure. So that's like a big one. And then low BMI. Again, we know being underweight can also put you at an increased risk.
Yeah.
Other things we see if you have a history of fractures, low sex hormones, low testosterone and low estrogen, both of those are actually dangerous. We do need both of them, right? Smoking is kind of an interesting one. Smoking has actually been shown. So smoking doesn't seem like it would affect our bone density, right? Like that's one that I always found surprising and had to be like, what? But I remember like, kind of coming to the conclusion in the end. But the big, if I had to summarize this quickly, the chemicals that get into your body due to smoking actually interact with calcium in a way that causes it not to like calcify properly. So I'm going to skip forward just a little bit and talk like down here. You'll see excessive intake of sodium, excessive protein, excessive vitamin A, and excessive caffeine. That all of those things can also result in decreased bone density. And that's another one that seems kind of weird. And we're going to lump smoking into that group because the process by which like smoking decreases your bone density is kind of similar to those things. So we'll use sodium as the example just because it's kind of easier. But like sodium and calcium, they're both minerals and they are somewhat attracted to each other. So they like to make like a good chemical bond. So what happens is like ideally in your body, when you get calcium, it gets attracted to your bone, it gets attracted to more calcium. But if there's like just a lot of sodium in the area, right, it's almost like it distracts the calcium and it's like, oh, well, I'm going to go bind to that instead. And so it goes over there and binds to the sodium. So the sodium is preventing you from using the calcium or the protein or the vitamin A or the caffeine or the whatever hundreds of chemicals are in a cigarette, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, that's kind of the weird reason that happens. What was that, Thomas? I saw it for a second.
Oh no, I was just gonna respond yes.
Oh, okay. I can always see the flash of the unmute thing. I'm like, what?
So like I have a question. So about the protein, like what's too much protein for you? Like what does that consider that? Like too much?
So our protein recommendations are this. I would say 1.2 grams, or I'm sorry, I'd say up to 1.7 grams per kilogram of body weight is what's recommended at the most. So if we look at protein recommendations, we'll go and we'll type in NASM here because it'll have it. But you'll see this in your nutrition chapter, which is chapter 17, I want to say. I don't know why I'm so bad at memorizing the chapters, but if you look at them, there's sort of like three sort of categories of athletes here, right? Sedentary people, which if you're sedentary, the amount of protein recommended is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. That's about 0.4 grams per pound. So like I weigh 179 pounds. So that is going to be 72 grams of protein a day if I'm sedentary. Like if I'm not moving around or doing too much physical activity, that's enough protein to, facilitate repair.
Right.
But if I'm like an endurance athlete or, a strength athlete, well, at the minimum, we want about 0.5. So 179, that's not the button I meant to hit. 179 times 0.5. So that's about 90 grams of protein a day. Or up to like, if I'm really doing like bodybuilding, for instance, maybe even as high as 0.8. So 179 times 0.8, that's about 143 grams. So for me, I like to get that as my protein intake, and I try not to go super high over that, but because you'll sometimes hear people doing like 2 grams per pound, which is just so much protein. That is where it's like, hey man, like your kidneys have to process all that. And you'll hear people say like too much protein is bad for your kidneys. That's not necessarily true, but but like if you have kidney problems, if you have any type of kidney damage, it's like, well, now you have all this extra protein that can't be processed by maybe this section of the damaged kidney. So it's going to just sit around and it's going to make you sick. So it's not necessarily like that it damages your kidneys. It just means your kidneys have to work more. And if you don't have functioning kidneys to be able to work more, you're gonna be in trouble. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's sort of a misinterpretation of it's not a misinterpretation, it's an oversimplification when people say like, oh, protein's bad for your kidneys. It's just a little too simple. So I would say if you want to go as high as 1 gram per pound, there's not a ton of evidence out there to suggest that that is better than, 1.7, or I'm sorry, 0.8 grams per pound. So like for me, it would be anywhere from 143 to 179, right? That above 143 up to 179, does it improve my chances of increasing my muscle mass? Not really. What if I was only eating, we go to that low end, we say the sedentary end, right? 179 times 0.4. What if I was only eating 72? Well, now I know that increasing my protein intake beyond that will probably have positive benefits, right?
Right.
It'll probably increase like my muscle mass, as long as I'm working out, right? So think of it this way. Whenever you work out, you're damaging your muscles. You want to have just a little bit more protein coming in than you have going out. You are in a positive, we call it a nitrogen balance because protein is nitrogen based, but we want to be in a positive protein balance, positive nitrogen balance. If you're in a negative one, you're creating more damage than you're bringing back in. But going way beyond and being super positive is not better than just barely being positive. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a question. So like, let's say for like someone who's like pretty lean but wants to cut some fat, right? And then like to build some muscle in the process, would you recommend having the protein just a little tad higher than usual? If it could?
So bodybuilders do that. Bodybuilders will crank it up when they're trying to be very lean.
Right.
And there's two reasons for that. One, there's sort of the myth of like more protein, more muscle,
Right.
But that's I think at this point a lot of bodybuilding has been getting more scientific. That's sort of the old school mentality. But like more information is available now, and everybody's kind of learning it. The real reason that sometimes bodybuilders will do that is because of the 3 macros, proteins, fats, and carbs, protein is the one that burns the most calories passively. It's the hardest for your body to process. So if you amp your protein intake like crazy, what'll happen is you'll actually get to burn some extra calories along the way by doing nothing. So as a bodybuilder, that's very attractive when you're on a cut.
Right. Does that also prevent like a little bit of muscle loss in the process?
Well, being on a cut in general is going to increase your risk of muscle loss. There's really no way to be in a caloric deficit, but the idea is like, let's say you lose 1 pound, do you want 50% of it to be fat and 50% of it to be muscle? I don't know, maybe it's not bad, I guess. But like, if you amp your protein intake and also exercise regularly while you're on this cut, maybe you'll lose 70% fat, 30% muscle, or 90% fat, 10% muscle,
Gotcha. Yeah, because my question was like, okay, so right now I'm like, I just bumped up my protein from like just 1 gram to like 1.2 to 1.3. Because last year that's what I did.
Per pound?
Per pound.
Okay.
Yeah. So 150 now, so I'm currently eating about like 190 to like 200 grams of protein. But yeah.
So
And
yeah,
one of the main reasons, one of the main reasons was because like I thought maybe that would also like amped up like I guess like a body recomp, right? Like kind of like replacing not replacing fat with so like exactly what we talked about last time. It's like some people say, oh yeah, fat turns into muscle, whatever, right? But that's not really how we explain it. It's more like you lose fat, but you're adding muscle at the same time. So that's why my mindset was like in that direction. Like maybe if I put my protein a little bit high, maybe that could happen. Or how does that work?
So it basically let's picture. I'm gonna make you know how bad I am at making charts, but it'll look like this. So let's say that this line here represents like protein intake, right? So this is protein intake, right? And then over here, this is representing like muscle mass gain. So if we we'll go with the blue line here. So let's say like, no protein, you're really not gaining much muscle mass, right? But then like you increase your protein intake, right? And what's going to happen is like your ability to increase muscle goes up until you get to that top. Right now, let's say you start to get to like, here we are at the peak, right? Right here where I'm at currently is, let's say 1 gram per pound. Then what starts to happen is it just kind of flattens out. So I could have, so this is actually, I need to move this. This is protein intake down here. This is why I'm so bad at making charts. And this is muscle. Right, so there's our muscle mass, right? So your intake, let's say this is, we'll put a little line here, and we'll put, wow. Let's say this is, 0.8, 0.8 grams. Well, we'll use the pound, so 0.4 grams per pound. Let me make this smaller. So there's 0.4. So it's like your ability, that's not helping you out much, right? But then we take it up and we go, let's say like, we get that up to, let's say like 0.6, right? We'll say this is 0.6 grams per pound. And so it resulted in like an increase, muscle gain capacity. So that's great. And then over here, this is like, that 0.8 grams per pound, 0.8 to 1.0 grams per pound, right? And so there we see that, and that's kind of the peak. So anything beyond that, like everything here, which is like greater than 1.0 grams per pound, it just kind of caps off. It doesn't necessarily get any better.
Okay.
So that's what I would say. There's some evidence out there. Some people have done a little bit of research, but I think it's kind of flimsy. They've looked at it and they're like, I don't know, we gave people massive amounts of protein, they gained massive amounts of muscle compared with a group that didn't get that much protein and didn't. And that's like, then you look at like how they did it, and it's like both populations were people who had never worked out before. So it could have just been like a major training response because like they had never exercised, and their body was like, whoa, and just blew up for a minute,
Like those newbie gains came in, right?
Exactly, newbie gains. So that's a constant like thing that happens in a lot of like research studies and stuff.
Oh, I see.
So this chart, by the way, this looks really similar to so if you train your body like let's imagine I just delete this part here and delete this and just say this is if you train 1 time per body part per week, we see this much muscle gain. If you train 2 times per body part per week, we see an increased training response. But 3 is not better than 2. It's about equal. Right. So that's, I think we're getting into a similar, to use that as analogous, right? I think that's very similar. People are like, oh, well, if 2 times increased my muscle mass, then I'll go 3 times. And it's like, it's about the same as 2.
Yeah, true. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, I was thinking about like, think of it as overfilling your gas tank.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
So, and bone density wise, too much of that protein laying around could actually, in the long run, be not so great. Also, increased protein intake is also associated oftentimes, like where are you getting your protein from? A lot of times it's coming from like meat and stuff, which increases your sodium intake, which increases your risk of like heart disease and stuff.
True.
So, I'm not a huge fan of like super high protein. If you're trying to fill up your macros, yeah, I think I like enough protein. I'm not saying like I dislike protein, but like I think get the amount you need, get into that positive nitrogen balance. And then if you need to like fill things up in your, generally
your fats and carbs,
carbohydrates and fats. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Cool.
So The effects of exercise. We know all this. We've already kind of been talking about it because it kind of bleeds in, but low intensity exercise is recommended for clients with osteoporosis. We don't want to go too intense. It's kind of a bummer because intense exercise is actually what builds bone density the best. So when you have good bone density and you want to make it better, I say go with high intensity exercise, like lift heavy. Heavy lifting, 1 to 5 reps, or maybe up to 12, rather than reps of 15, have been shown to raise our bone density the most. However, if you've already got bone density issues, lifting that heavy could result in too much fracture, and that's not so great. But we do know that exercise slows the decrease in bone mass due to the stress that it puts on the body. So our favorite mode here is actually the treadmill with handrail support. And you notice we don't have a lot of options here. What about the rower? What about the spin bike? What about obviously osteoporosis, old folks getting in the pool doing water aerobics? So here's the thing, those things are great. And I love them for developing the cardio respiratory system. But unfortunately, their mode of resistance is either friction or viscosity and things like that. There is something, and I don't think we fully understand why necessarily, but there is something about gravity as a resistance that is better for bone density in particular. I don't think we fully understand the reasons behind that. So if you need more description, I don't think I quite have it for you. So I apologize. It drives me crazy when I don't know the why behind things. But we do see it. We see it every single time. Every time they test bikes versus treadmill, or rowing machine versus treadmill, or swimming versus treadmill. Treadmill comes out on top every time. It probably has something to do with it. It is more impact, right? And so it creates, little tiny fractures. I think that it is related to, fun fact, I don't know why I know so many weird facts about cats, but I throw them in randomly every now and then. Cats' bones actually heal faster than most animals in the animal kingdom. So they'll see cats jump out of trees, and they'll break a bunch of bones, and they'll bounce back from it relatively quickly. And I know we associate cats being happy with purring. It's oh, he likes me. It's right? That is actually something cats will do when they are injured. When they're injured, they will purr more often. I know we think of it as that's why I always tell people it's when your cat's purring, it doesn't necessarily mean they're happy. It just means that they feel trust, actually. Or they are trying to fix an injury. And the theory there is that the vibrations, the frequency by which that vibrating happens, is actually causing their bones to rattle, which causes them to repair more quickly. This is why one of those, I showed this to you guys the other day, the power plate is this thing that they sell that vibrates at a very specific frequency. And this in particular, I don't know what's going on with those caved in knees, but I hate that. Sorry. I absolutely would not let my client do that exercise. But you can see these vibration techniques have actually been shown to increase bone density, which is why this is so popular among seniors. It's great. Huge fan of the power plate. They are crazy expensive. How much is a power plate? Yeah, a couple $1,000, 10 grand for the stand-up one. They do have the tech, world's gotten more technologically advanced. Now you can find the little knockoff ones for $1,000, or there's a knockoff one for, those are all really expensive. I've seen vibration training. Yeah, $200. But this in particular is very good for bone density. It really is. Which is why, that's why we like it so much. Frequency, we want about 2 to 5 days per week. Low in, we can see 2 is pretty low, right? But again, if somebody's bones are aching after a really intense workout, that's why we got to keep that low. But ideally, we would get them up to 5 days per week. For the intensity, we're going anywhere from 40 to 85% VO2 max. So that is like anywhere from zone 1 and zone 2. If they can handle the more intense versions, you can go for it. It's really not a, this isn't a cardiovascular disease. So there's not a lot of danger in doing intense cardio other than, if they're doing like sprint, high impact stuff. Duration, we want to go 20 to 60 minutes per day. If they can't handle that, we can do a couple 8 to 10 minute bouts of exercise. So if you're aiming for like 30 minutes in a straight session and your client is just like too achy to be able to get through that, you can tell them on their off days to break it up, 3 10-minute sessions, and then eventually 4 10-minute sessions, and till eventually they're getting up to an hour, and then 3 20-minute sessions, and that's 60 minutes, overall, until eventually, one straight 60-minute. Assessments, pushing, pulling, overhead squat are all very, 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 very good. You will notice we don't have any balance assessments here just because we know that they are all, probably going to have decreased balance already anyways. And instead of the overhead squat, if your client is struggling with being able to squat because of aches and pains, then sitting or standing from a chair is a really good option, because you can see whether the knees cave in, the feet turn out. You can see all those a lot of those postural distortions anyways. Static and active stretching, both of those are fine. Not a huge fan of dynamics, although they are kind of high impact, which I kind of like. But again, they also require a lot of balance, butt kickers, high knees, knee to chest, hen pecs, those things, dynamic stretches like that, because they require like balance and coordination, maybe not the best option for a client with osteoporosis. For your resistance training, we're going to go 1 to 3 sets of about 8 to 20 repetitions. So you can see we're starting to get low on the intensity, right? Or I'm sorry, we're starting to get high on the intensity, right? We almost got to 6 reps, which is, the bottom of the hypertrophy scale. But we're going just above that, focused a little bit more on building up that endurance. And at the most, we're going to go to about 85% 1 rep max. We're really not going to get any higher than that. And even 85% 1 rep max, guys, that's a lot. That's heavy lifting. That corresponds to about 6 to 8 reps there. So that's pretty tough. 2 to 3 days per week. Special considerations: always progress slowly, base it on postural control. That's always important for every client, but it's especially important if you're talking about bones. And then exercise should be progressed from free sitting or standing. A lot of times you'll have to start by like working the body parts separately at first. So you'll have to do like, a lot of like isolation exercises. And then once your client gets a little bit more used to that, we can start working our way towards compound exercises. And we start from sitting and then progress to standing, and eventually to balancing, once they've really built that up. But it is going to take a very long time. This is a slow process, increasing bone density. It's definitely not as fast as building muscle. And then you're going to put special emphasis on focusing on the hips, thighs, back, and arms. So a lot of arm exercises, because again, you'll see a lot of like fractures. You'll see a lot of fractures like at the ends of the arms. These are gonna that's not what I'm looking for. It's a full-on break. Those are compound fractures, not compound. I'm looking for proximal. There we go. Actually, no. See, I can't see them when I zoom in. I just want like a little tiny one. Well, anyway, here's a healthy one. So you'll see like little tiny fractures, usually like, in these areas right here or here or here or here, where the kind of bones are coming together. In clients with osteoporosis, just like we saw in the neck of the femur instead of like, the body of it. So we're going to put special emphasis on the hips and thighs. Special emphasis on the back, because we are trying to like, keep the spine nice and healthy, and special emphasis on the arms. Any questions? How you two feeling?
Pretty good.
Feeling fine.
All righty. Well, let's look at arthritis here. So arthritis, much like osteoporosis, there's actually going to be 2 types here. but they're not called type 1, type 2. They are called osteoarthritis or rheumatoid arthritis. So interesting. There we go. It's on the next page. I was like, where the heck are my definitions? So arthritis is a condition characterized by dysfunction of the joints. So there's two versions of this. They are very different from one another. Either through a decrease in the cartilage, which causes like bone spurs, or due to a lack of space in the joints. So if I look up osteoarthritis, which is the, generally when we're referring to arthritis, this is the one we're probably talking about. We're talking about like, I got arthritis of the knees. I used to be a construction worker. Oh, I've got arthritis here because I used to, be active in this way or that way, right? And so what happens is the cartilage gets kind of thinned out in whatever area. This is the knee. It's probably the most common place we're going to experience arthritis, right? And so that cartilage kind of gets thinned out due to like banging and pressure and things like that. And so, we see like a little bit of thinning there. We see some damage. And then what happens is like your body tries to repair that damage, but it does it imperfectly. Then you end up with bone spurs, which makes it even more painful and grindy, and this can happen really in any of the joints of our body, right? You can see there it's happening in the femur, right? It can happen all over the place. So that's osteoarthritis, right? More commonly known as degenerative joint disease, because its cartilage is degenerating over time, in which the cartilage becomes soft, frayed, or thins out as the results of years of trauma to the joints. Lots of athletes actually will have arthritis in the later years of their life, right? Most common areas, the hands, the spine, the hips, and then the big one is probably the knees. But there is also another type of arthritis. There is rheumatism or rheumatoid arthritis, which looks like this. And that is where you'll sometimes see like those knobs kind of form on people's joints. So here's sort of the difference between these two. So osteoarthritis, like here's a normal healthy joint, right? There's connective tissue on both ends that acts as like a, buffer. But if you damage that down, we start to see like little bone spurs. We start to see like a little bit of like bone on bone action, which is very painful. In rheumatoid arthritis, look at all this. So that's extra connective tissue, which for some reason, our immune system thinks that it needs to do this. So rheumatoid arthritis is actually an autoimmune disorder. Autoimmune disorders are basically any type of disorder where your immune system goes rogue and starts doing its own thing. Like MS, multiple sclerosis, is an autoimmune disorder where for some reason your immune system starts attacking your neurons. Why? We don't know, right? Rheumatoid arthritis is very similar. It's where when you experience any impact or, ache in the joint, the immune system goes, oh my gosh, something happened to the joint. Put some more tissue in there. And then it just stuffs the joint full of all this thing. That causes a lot of times the joints to bulge, right? And you can see this extra connective tissue and it causes that like, knobby sort of look on the joints there, right? That's what we consider to be rheumatoid arthritis. And it's painful. Sometimes you'll also see, because it's not, it does actually affect the skin as well. For the record, like you'll see rheumatoid arthritis is disease-wise kind of similar to like lupus, like lupus. And you'll see people like they'll be very flush. And they'll get like these rashes on their skin. It also affects their joints and it affects their connective tissue. And so that's another like very common condition that we'll see. It's actually biologically somewhat similar to rheumatism. But what that is, it's an autoimmune disease in which the body experiences a thickening of articular, that's joint, tissue, right? So those are the two types of arthritis. Now, they're very different in terms of like what they are. But what's interesting is like how we respond to them in the gym is actually pretty similar, which is why we can actually loop them together in sort of one big table here. But kind of going out of order here, but going back and looking at our special considerations, right? One thing that we know, we are going to see maximum oxygen uptake is typically lower, just like in osteoporosis, and for the same reason, right? We know that unfortunately, due to alterations in posture and things like that, our ability to sort of expand the rib cage, bring things in, is typically going to be lower. The tolerance for exercise may be very limited in clients with arthritis. They'll get really bad flare-ups, particularly rheumatoid arthritis. You'll hear people say, like, you know, they get the aches and pains, they're worse in the morning. You know, they like wake up stiff. Or like, my grandma always says this, and she gets to always be right because she lives in the Northwest where it always rains. But my grandma will go, "It's gonna rain today. I can feel it in my bones." You know, like, she's always right. You know, mostly because of the Northwest, but also because like you feel it. You know, a lot of seniors, where do they move? They go to Palm Springs, they go to Florida, they go to Arizona, right? Why do they move to areas like that? Because those are areas that have a lot lower barometric pressure because they are deserts. My great grandparents loved Yuma, Arizona. I don't know, they loved Yuma. But like, you're going there because like that dry weather, you know, really prevents like the joints from feeling like achy. When there's increased barometric pressure in the atmosphere, it increases the pressure in the joints and it feels bad. This is why you'll hear people say they can feel it in their bones. They actually can, you know, because more pressure comes in before a storm or before, you know, rain. So their tolerance for exercise may be limited due to like flare-ups. You know, they go to bed, clouds roll in, they wake up the next morning, they're like, "Oh, my body," right? That's sort of a flare-up. Medications can significantly influence the bone and muscle health. A lot of times, like some of the negative effects of like certain like cardiorespiratory medications, not so much beta blockers, but like calcium channel blockers and things like that, they can actually limit your bone density. And they can actually cause like, you know, inflammation of the joints, and that inflammation is going to be very, very painful, you know. And so we definitely, with clients who have arthritis, want to check for other comorbidities. A big one is going to be osteoporosis. A lot of clients who have arthritis are often dealing with osteoporosis. So due to the decreased bone density, you know, they're being a little more gentle on the bone, which means the joints take the kind of brunt of all that pressure. And then there's more impact, and then that damages the cartilage, and, you know, it's kind of a feedback loop. And then one thing that's very, very, very common is morning stiffness, particularly in clients who have rheumatoid arthritis. Honestly, guys, you'll probably not want to do too many early morning sessions with those type of clients, you know. And I'll tell you, like, it's, you know, if you want to make sure that your clients don't cancel on you, that is definitely a thing. I've had clients with osteoporosis or with arthritis for years, and like sometimes I'll just get a text in the morning where it's like, joints feel like crap, I'm staying in, you know. And I'm like, you know, but I get it. It's
It happens.
yeah. So that's where it's like, hey, I know you want that 7 a.m. slot, but what about a 10 a.m. slot? And that gives them a little bit more time to kind of get up and grease the hinges, you know. So the effects that we have, like very positive effects, right? Improved flexibility is nice, which we know expands the space between our joints, which means they're less likely to impact. Increased balance, which is going to help, you know, they're not going to put too much pressure on one joint compared to another when they lose their balance. And we can improve that cardiovascular status by improving their posture. And then aside from that, we're also just elevating their pain threshold. You know, one thing that kind of comes along with exercise is you learn how to deal with discomfort a little bit better. And that can help improve quality of life. Is it making their arthritis better? Not really, but is it making their quality of life better? Yes. You know, like I say the same thing about MS. MS is a neurological autoimmune disorder. We have no effect on it at all when you exercise. There's no, you know, at least exercise improves osteoporosis. At least it can, you know, open up the joints and, you know, maybe get some blood flow in there for arthritis. We know it improves cardiovascular dysfunction. Multiple sclerosis, Exercise has no positive effect on the disease itself, unfortunately. But I've worked with a lot of, well, I say a lot. I've worked with a few clients who have MS, and it does improve their quality of life because MS causes you to lose your balance constantly. You'll see people with MS where they're very unstable because basically they're losing communication with their nervous system. The neuron signal is getting interrupted constantly because it got eaten away by the autoimmune or by the immune system. So does that stop when they exercise? No, not at all. But exercise does train their nervous system. So while you may not be able to make the disease any better, you do make their quality of life better because let's say they lose their balance temporarily and then they take like a false step. They're strong, they're capable, they've trained other parts of their nervous system, and boom, they catch themselves and stand back up rather than falling all the way to the ground. That's a big quality of life improvement. So that's kind of the same thing with arthritis. Is it going to like get this disease to go away? Not really, but it is going to elevate their pain threshold, which is going to make them feel better. And it is going to improve their endurance, their posture, and all kinds of other things that are going to improve their overall quality of life. So modes that are most effective, we like stationary cycling, we like treadmill, we like step aerobics, we like anything with arthritis. You know, all of them are going to be just as effective as the others. This isn't like osteoporosis. It doesn't have anything to do with weight bearing versus non-weight bearing. It's just moving is moving, you know. 3 to 5 days a week, so pretty classic there. 60 to 80% heart rate max, so anywhere from below zone 1 up to about the mid of zone 2 there. Duration, we're probably gonna keep it short, 30 minutes. Remember, this is an inflammatory problem, so super long sessions increase the inflammation, and that's not the look we're going for, you know. So 30 minutes is going to be pretty appropriate here. In terms of our assessments, pushing, pulling, overhead squats, single leg balance, all of them are fine if they're tolerated. They've got like a lot of aches and pains in their knees, we've got to be careful. Same thing is true of self-myofascial release. That can be fine. You know, that's pushing on bones, that's pushing on muscle. That has nothing to do with the stuff in between the joints, unless it is taking them to like super exaggerated range of motion. So for instance, like, you know, if you look at like SMR hip flexors, right? So like, love the hip flexors, you know, but if they're doing something like this and their knee is slamming into the ground, or they're hyperextending the leg and then like it's locking out the joint, well, maybe that's going to not be so well tolerated by, you know, a client. But like this version here, this is fine, but now it's putting a lot of pressure on the wrists, right? If they get aches and pains in the wrist. So you just got to be cautious about like which version you're doing. It might not have anything to do with what you're foam rolling. It might have to do with the posture to get into it. So instead of foam rolling, maybe we use like a tiger tail or a Theracane or a massage gun or something like that. And then static and active, again, we're not doing any dynamics here just because typically those are exaggerated range of motion and it causes the joints to lock. That's like a really big thing, which we're going to see here in just a second. We look at special considerations. It says stay in the pain-free range of motion. You want to be really cautious with your arthritic clients about not hyperextending their joints or, you know, hyperflexing, which is nobody ever does that, but like, you want to make sure that you stay in like a pain-free range of motion. Don't lock out the joints because then they're just grinding. Don't hyperbend the joints because then they're gaping, you know. 1 to 3 sets, 10 to 12 reps. So, you know, relatively low intensity there. I mean, still moderate intensity. It's not like it's as high as 15. And 2 to 3 days per week. You'll notice we do want to stay kind of right in the middle, right? If we consider like our rep scheme anywhere from 1 to 20, you know, this is right in the middle of all that, which makes a lot of sense for arthritis, because if we go too low on the reps, our intensity starts to climb, and now they're lifting really heavy, right? And that could put too much pressure on the joints. Like me, I'm doing a powerlifting routine, been doing it for the last 7 weeks. I got 1 more week left, and my joints hurt. You know, like I'm lifting properly, and I'm like, God, that hurts. You know, like just at the end of this, you know, sort of routine. And then we've got 20 repetitions. That's just like repeated exposure, which can also sort of like cause inflammatory responses in the joint. So we're kind of just staying right in the middle there. You know, And that's going to ensure that that doesn't happen. We put more pressure on, on the muscles when we do this rep range. Avoid heavy lifting and avoid high rep. Again, just avoid the extremes of both ends. Stay right in the middle. And then stay in the pain-free range of motion as well. Any questions before we take a look at a SOAP note, guys?
No, it all makes sense.
No criticism.
Love it. All right. Well, let's take a look here. Let's look at an example person. So this is Jude. They have osteoporosis and arthritis. They're currently retired. They like playing chess. They like to go fishing, like going for walks. Currently, the medications they're on is just a simple anti-inflammatory medication to kind of deal with the aches and pains associated with that arthritis. Commonly dealing with knee pain. They get a little bit of upper pain in the upper back when they sit for too long, which means they got that hunch posture, right? 72 years old. They used to be 5'11". Now they're only 5'9", which starts to make sense. And we see a really bad upper cross syndrome. We see that forward head. We see those elevated shoulders. We see the rounded shoulders, right? That's where that sort of upper back pain is kind of coming from. They also have an excessive forward lean and knees caving in. So we're seeing like a lot of dysfunction in both the upper and lower body here. Lots of postural problems. Tug test took 15 seconds. That is definitely not fast. So, we're going to be working on that. Overhead squat, we modified that down to a sit to stand assessment. We didn't do a balance assessment. Pushing and pulling to look for that upper body dysfunction. And again, we like the tug test there. Our routine is to alternate between days of strength training and days of walking with a little bit of rest in the middle. So we're going to have Monday is going to be workout A, Tuesday is going to be cardio, Wednesday is going to be rest, Thursday is going to be workout B, Friday is going to be cardio, Saturday is going to be workout C, and then we're going to get a little bit of rest. So if we looked at that, right, if we've got like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, right? We've got workout A, cardio, rest, workout B, cardio, workout C. So we do want to get sort of 3 days of strength training here, right? And then when we look at that routine, the cardio plan is to walk 2 days per week, 30 minutes at a pace that, they should be able to hold a conversation. The resistance training, what we're going to do is we're going to do 3 sets of 10 repetitions at a medium tempo. Workout A is going to be upper body. So that is upper body. Workout B is going to be lower body. And workout C is going to be total body. So Eddie, this is kind of similar to the one you were talking about the other day, right?
Yeah.
So that's sort of what that looks like for this class. That way we are getting to revisit the body parts twice per week, right? Some of the upper stuff is going to be revisited here. Some of the lower stuff is going to be revisited here, but we're never putting too much pressure in one specific area per day. We're sort of laying out our volume so that we don't do too much and cause like a really bad inflammatory response. Flexibility, we're going to avoid the excessive ranges of motion. So we're just going to make sure they don't overdo it or lock any joints out. Probably when it comes to a pectoral stretch, we're going to do the bent elbow version, right? That way they don't lock out their elbow. When it comes to the lats, right, we'll probably do like an overhead lat version with a bent elbow rather than the ball lat stretch, which is actually my favorite, but not very good for Jude here. Internal rotator, so we'll do like a spinal twist there. That'll be a really good one. But it won't, we probably wouldn't do the standing version just because that's going to kind of collapse in on all those discs there. But this version here with like a nice bent knee, love that. It's great. Biceps femoris, that one's going to be challenging. I remember that's that lateral muscle that's causing the knees to cave in, right? That lateral hamstring. We will probably do the standing version like this. Rather than, or actually, you know what? We'll probably do the supine version where they can go here and then they can just kind of straighten out their leg. TFL, bent and straight standing version there, and then calf stretch. Cautious not to overlock the knees during that calf stretch. But that's sort of what our plan is going to look like for Jude here. Any questions, or is any of that not make sense, guys?
Yeah. Let's see over here. Yeah.
Doing good?
So okay.
That. Well, all right, fellas. That's honestly all I got for you today. I'll go ahead and let you release it. Today's Thursday, right? God, I feel like
Yeah.
my brain's broken. All right, well, I'll let you guys out of here, and we'll see you tomorrow. We'll finish up our final population, and then we'll be meeting up. Today is day 6, by the way, so check for homework 3. This is gonna be your final piece of homework in this course. We got day 7 on Friday, and we'll meet up on Monday in person, and we'll be covering, we'll finish up our stuff. We'll look at upper cross syndrome, which we didn't cover last time. And so we'll build some routines for that and practice in the gym.
All right. Sounds good.
Cool.
All right.